Hello, hello. This is the My Artifact episode number 3603. Today's date is September 21, 2025. It's been almost like a morning at 7:18 a.m. All right, we just jump into the question. All right, let's go. Okay, our question is: what if earthquake predicted natural disaster accurately? Okay, what exactly is this question and why am I asking this question to myself? This is a what if question. Okay, I ask this what if question to understand myself, understand my knowledge and try to know what I should supposed to be know about that particular stuff. It's about what if question is a really interesting way to give the answer. While giving the answer, I am kind of like a predicting or my perspective would be changed and it's really good. Okay, yeah. Now let's jump back to the question. Um, what if earthquake predict natural disaster accurately? Okay, let's just understand what is actually earthquake and can we able to predict that. Earthquake means earthquake. Okay, yeah, it's not really have any simple kind of like a simply explanation regarding about earthquake. We already knew what is actually earthquake. Okay, can we predict the earthquake? Well, we cannot. Yeah, we cannot. We don't really have any kind of like a something equipment technology, nothing really at all, so that we predict the earthquake. Okay, yeah. Let's just understand first what is exactly earthquake and how this earthquake is actually happened. Okay, yeah. Earthquake is a like earthquake. Okay, yeah. Like basically, I don't know how to supposed to explain earthquake, but how this is actually happened. Okay, yeah. Um, our globe, entire Earth, is actually at multiple tectonic plates. Okay, yeah. I'm living in India, so my tectonic plate is a Indian. Okay, Indian tectonic plate. By the way, India is a subcontinent plate. Okay, yeah. If you are living in Asia, you are in Eurasian plate. Oh yeah, Eurasian means Europe plus Asian plate. Okay, yeah. There is African plate, there is a Pacific plate, there is a like a Atlantic plate. Okay, I don't know, like there are multiple plates. Okay, those are like it's a kind of like a tectonic plate. Okay, what are those plate? Okay, it's a kind of like a something the base structure of our entire continent. Okay, yeah, and these plates are actually moving each other. Okay, all the time are moving but are very slow, so you don't really feel that thing. Okay, so basically what exactly happened then when the two tectonic plates are kind of like a something crushed to each other or rub with each other, they are kind of like a something creating some sort of movement. Okay, let me give you example. Okay, uh, okay uh, like basically if you are might gonna understand. Okay, so take a one hand. Okay, left hand, take a right hand. Okay, make it kind of like a something just exactly close to each other with kind of like a similar thing, like a similar plane side. Okay, now try to connect with those things. Okay, and now you actually see your index finger is actually connected with another index finger, right? Yeah, now push them even more. So when you push them, you actually seen that the other index finger is actually went up and uh, my other side of index finger is kind of like a went down, and then suddenly my one hand is actually overlap with another hand if I kind of like a push further. Okay, this is what exactly happened in the tectonic plate. Okay, like basically is saying that ki one tectonic plate is kind of like a simply collide with another tectonic plate, and because of the kind of like a some immense pressure that they have, they kind of like a sometimes they just rub on each other. Okay, and when they rub on each other, now rub means like that, not the way that kind of like a rub means like this is rub, no. Rub means like that they each, like I'm talking about tectonic plate, which is like a far much bigger plate, no. Okay, yeah. And when they kind of like simply just try to as simplifies it, when it kind of like a rub on each other, it just create a movement. Okay, yeah. Not only on kind of like a simply the plate that we are in, but also another plate. Okay. So because of this thing, uh it just kind of like a something earthquake happened. The movement is actually created, and that is called something really earthquake happened. Okay, yeah. Now do you understand? Okay. So um do we have any kind of like assembly predicting technology? Do we have any kind of like assembly technology that we could predict the earthquake? Well, we cannot. Okay, yeah, we cannot. Why we cannot build that kind of like assembly? Like we have weather pattern, we have kind of like assembly weather that could be predict. Well, yeah, somewhat, but predicting weather and predicting earthquake is a far more different than that. Okay, yeah. Predicting weather is a kind of like assembly looking at the cloud, dense cloud, and looking at the flow of the cloud, and we could predict that key the flow of the cloud is actually going from north to south. So probably is this thing that key we try to predict that in the southern area might have a little bit of rainfall, and because of the cloud that we could see. Okay, not only from surface from the planet, but actually kind of like a from the satellite, from above, from, yeah, we actually see the cloud. So basically it's this thing, from that particular thing we actually predict the weather pattern. Also we emit a lot of kind of like a sensors and things, and we also have kind of like a data, wind flow and things like that, so that we kind of like a not really, almost like a 70-80% we might gonna predict the weather. And probably like also weather is not predicted as well, but still almost like a 70-80% we might predict the weather, because we actually have a lot of equipment for predicting that, as also as a visual format, things like that. But earthquake is actually happened beneath the earth crust. Okay, yeah. So how do I supposed to see that thing? How do I supposed to sense that data? It's not. Okay, yeah, it is really not. And as well as I'm talking about the tectonic plate, which is like a, it's not the kind of like a simply the plate that you think it is. So it's a far much bigger plate, and it is like it is not. And sometimes now the earthquake is not just happen is because of kind of like a, sort of the tectonic plate movement. Sometimes it's happened because of the like a mental, like a basically beneath the earth tectonic plate there is a kind of like a some mental who is kind of like a, try to get outside and things and that. So there is a lot of reason why the earthquake happened, and we can't predict that because our earth crust is kind of like a something made with a lot of stuff that we don't know about that, and pressure is always exerted upward. So probably this is like a really chaos situation. So even if we have that kind of like a something technology, we not really that much predicting the earthquake. By the way, I'm trying to tell you from right now point of perspective. At the moment, I know that there is no kind of like some equipment that we can predict the earthquake. But in the future, we might have kind of like a something the equipment that would predict the earthquake. Okay, yeah. Now imagine a scenario that what if we could have that particular equipment that would predict the earthquake? What would happen? What would kind of like a something that key? What would changes happen? There is a lot of good change happen. First of all, is that ki if we predict the earthquake, then we would kind of like a somebody try to save people life as well as possible as we can. Example, let's just say that ki tomorrow at 7 a.m. this might be kind of like a predict at this particular day at this particular location. So if I know that thing, then probably I would have time to kind of like a evacuate people, okay, in that particular region. Also kind of like a something, if I evacuate this thing, I might gonna save a lot of people. Okay, yeah. Another thing is that ki in that particular region, if they have kind of like a some power plant or things or that, I might shut down, or I might try to kind of like a something um, that key like basically is this thing, because when the earthquake happened, the less destruction would be happen. So I try to make sure that this would be happen. Okay, yeah. Highways and road kind of like assembly block, that particular region kind of like assembly shut down, very less people might gonna over there. So if we're gonna do that, we actually save the life much more better way. Okay, yeah. uh, Another thing is that let's just imagine if they are kind of like a somebody, we predict the weather, predict the earthquake, and in that particular region there is a kind of like a nuclear plant. Okay, yeah. So basically is a nuclear plant is a very disaster thing. Like if the nuclear plant is actually kind of like a hit by the earthquake, then lot of kind of like a fucked up shit happen. So what should supposed to do is that we not only shut down the nuclear plant, but as well as kind of like a assembly, remove all those uranium material from the kind of like a make sure that all the radioactive material are in stable condition and are in secure position. Or maybe we can kind of like a remove all those radioactive material outside the plant, so that when the earthquake hit to the kind of like a something that particular plant, this might like a radiation might not gonna cause and things like that. So we kind of like a do that thing. Okay, yeah. So earthquake is a kind of like a something, just if we knew the prediction, if we knew when the earthquake happened, then we would kind of like a save lot of people, but as well as kind of like a simply try to make sure little less infrastructure kind of like a destroy, try to less. Okay, because infrastructure will be gonna destroy, but make sure that we are kind of like a try to less as possible as we can. Okay, so if you're gonna do that, it would be kind of like really helpful for every possible scenario. Okay, but it's just not just one thing. Okay, like sometimes now probably is this thing that key, there is a kind of like a lot of stuff happen. Okay, like basically if I'm gonna say, if I could predict the kind of like a earthquake, that is a really good thing, but the consequences is not only the good thing, it also bad thing too. Example is this thing, let's just say your equipment is actually predict the kind of like a some earthquake in particular region, and you evacuate people and things and that and stuff like that. But after all those things, the earthquake did not happen. Okay, yeah. Then what exactly happened? The people might not gonna trust that particular equipment or the government or things like that, and then people will kind of like simply take it as a kind of like a lightly, right? Because like basically they kind of like a trust, and it didn't really happen. So this is what kind of like simply chaos would happen. Like basically then people might not gonna kind of like a take it as a seriously, and when the people might not take the seriously, then probably is this thing when the real earthquake happened, and if I'm gonna tell them just evacuate, just like a just kind of like a somebody make this place is kind of like empty or things, or kind of like a somebody away from this place or things like that, people might not gonna listen. And when the people might not gonna listen, then probably what's the point of having the equipment that could predict the earthquake? Nothing really at all. Now people will gonna die and stuff like that. So this is what it is. Okay, so basically this thing, if we kind of like assembly have a kind of like assembly, and this is what actually happened in the weather pattern too. Because it's just like that na ki if we think that ki like tomorrow might have heavy rainfall and this would be not happen. So basically it's this thing that ki like right now most of people are not actually predicting, not actually kind of like a take it serious as a kind of like a weather pattern. Because the weather is kind of like a somebody, still we could kind of like a predict almost like a 70 to 80% of weather pattern correctly, but still it is that keep people not really kind of like a somebody way that way they didn't really take that much seriously. If there is something really chaos happened, then people might gonna take it like basically the when the government is actually kind of like a alert, a kind of like a orange alert, red alert, then probably when people will kind of like a take it as a seriously. But before that people don't really take that much. Okay, yeah. So basically same thing happened with the kind of like a somebody earthquake predicting pattern. Okay, yeah. If the kind of like a somebody earthquake kind of like a somebody just not happened, or people might not kind of like a somebody take it as a seriously, and this would be kind of like a lead to another disaster. Okay, yeah. Another thing is that ki this, if we have this kind of like technology, we can kind of like simply misuse that technology. How does we kind of like misuse that technology? Okay, yeah. Misuse means like that ki, let's just imagine that ki kind of like a somebody is this thing that ki there is a kind of like a somebody, a government who is a kind of like a somebody, uh, something like that ki kind of like a somebody like evacuate the people from one place to another place, or kind of like a somebody is this thing that ki um like how does it kind of like a somebody misuse. Well, misuse means like that. It's a kind of like a sort of political and economical point of perspective to misuse and stuff like that. But I shouldn't supposed to talk about that thing because it's a kind of like a new subject to talk and stuff like that. Okay, yeah. But the predicting earthquake is somewhat something is like like it's a very vague. Okay, yeah, and very kind of like a stuff that I don't know. Yeah, it's by the way, we kind of like a simply have a couple of things, okay, yeah, that we kind of like a predict the earthquake. Yeah, we still have a little bit of kind of like equipment that predict the earthquake, but kind of like a something very early as possible. Like basically, it's this thing that ki okay, yeah, what's a kind of like a something the utilization that like what's kind of like is only the preparation that we are actually doing it. Okay, first of all is that let's talk about as the Indian government what exactly is this thing. Okay, first of all is that we try to make sure that if the earthquake is can be predict as early as possible, it would be really good. Okay, but most of the time earthquake cannot be predicted and things would be kind of like a lead to disaster. So we need a kind of like a simply a particular team that would handle the earthquake disaster. Okay, so we have NDRF. Okay, National Disaster Refund Force, something like that. I'm not really sure what is it. This kind of like a somebody. It's a kind of like a military force. Okay, but it's not the military force. It's a kind of like a somebody. It's a kind of like a branch of military force. They have only one purpose that ki whenever the area is actually kind of like a flooded or kind of like a somebody earthquake prone or whatever it is, the team would went there. Okay, it's not the team of like a 10-20 people, like basically it's a team of almost like a maybe thousands of people. Okay, and they actually send almost like a maybe 100-200 people. Those are kind of like a warrior. So they actually went to that particular place and kind of like actually save people as much as they can. Okay, by helicopter, by using this, by using the airlift people and things like that, so that we would kind of like save the people. As well as this kind of like a team, NDRF team, is not only save the people but as also kind of like a build the camp and things like that. Okay, so that when the people are kind of like a something like they lost their home and things like that, we would have kind of like a something like the camp. In that particular camp they will kind of like a verify who are what kind of like a some identity that we have, and we will kind of like a ensure them their property should supposed to be kind of like a somebody get back in track or stuff like that probably. But still it's not kind of like a only way that exactly is it. Okay, yes. Okay, this is the one thing. Another thing is that we are not kind of like a simply the facing only the earthquake disaster. We are kind of like a facing the multiple natural disaster like a earthquake, tsunami, or things like that. So we also prepared for that. Okay, let me tell you one thing. When the earthquake is actually happened on the land, which we called as a earthquake. Okay, when the earthquake is actually happened on the sea, it's we called as a tsunami. Okay, so first of all, how the tsunami is actually happened and things like that. Okay, as I mentioned, when the kind of like a some earthquake is actually happened beneath the like a when the two tectonic plate are rub on each other or things like that. So when they rub on each other, it create the movement. Okay, it kind of like a create that vibration. Now when that vibration is actually strike on the surface of the earth, it would kind of like called as a kind of like a something earthquake. But when it strike on the kind of like a something surf on the kind of like a something water level, like a basically just think that key when the earthquake is actually happened on the Atlantic or Pacific, then what is actually happened that the millions of gallon will kind of like a something move from one place to another place. Okay, and it's kind of like a things that that wave is actually created. Example, like basically what should supposed to do is that try to throw a water at the river or kind of like a things, it would kind of like a create that particular puddle. Okay, like the puddle a kind of like a circular puddle, and that circular puddle is actually kind of like a somebody expand and things like that. This is what exactly happened. Okay, yeah, like because of kind of like a something the beneath the earth or surface there is a kind of like a tectonic plate or rub on each other or things like that. It would create the movement, and when it creates the movement, the millions of gallon water above there, it's kind of like a something move come from one place to another place, and when it move, it kind of like a create that particular puddle, and that puddle will kind of like a something create a waves. Okay, yeah, and when that wave is actually created, then kind of like a wind and everything is actually support that wave, because the wind is actually happen on the sea is kind of like a much more faster than kind of like a something on the surface level of earth. So basically when that thing happened, biggest wave is actually created, very big wave, almost like a 10-meter 20-meter wave is actually happened. And when that wave is actually strike on the coastal area of the land, then it would be kind of like a create a very big disaster, really big disaster. Okay, yeah. So basically for that particular purpose, we actually have kind of like a somebody predict that thing. How? Let me tell you one thing, that predict that what kind of like we are predicting. We are not predicting the earthquake. We are actually predicting the puddle creation. What is that? Okay, what, as I mentioned, what is that? A puddle, like basically when you throw a stone at the river or any kind of like a water body, it kind of like a create that particular puddle. Okay, so this is what exactly the puddle is. So what should we supposed to do is that we have to measure that puddle. Okay, puddle means that we have to measure the kind of like a simply the wave. Okay, exactly the wave, like how much big wave and things like that. So how do we supposed to measure the wave? We actually have a lot of kind of like some bogies. Okay, yeah, the wave bogies, I'm not really sure what exactly that, a kind of like a floating mechanism which is actually add. How Okay, so we actually have that kind of like a floating mechanism is actually at the sea or coastal area or things like that. We call them as a kind of like a bogey. I'm not really sure about the exact name for that. Okay, yeah, but still, this what is it's kind of like a orange kind of like a mechanism. Okay, yeah. So what does it do? It's a kind of like a somebody the it's a kind of like a somebody the sense, the kind of like a somebody the how much kind of like a assembly wave that we have. Okay, yeah. By the way, this is not just a one bogie is actually kind of like assembly situated. It's like basically thousands of bogies are actually kind of like assembly situated at particular set distance from one to each other. Okay, yeah. So what exactly is this thing? What is exactly that? Okay, so basically is this thing, let's just say that almost like a hundred kilometer away there is a kind of like a sorry bogie is actually predict that there is a kind of like a sorry weather is actually there is a kind of like a wave is actually coming, which is a kind of like a something higher than that, like a, let's just say 10-meter to 20-meter. So it kind of like a gives a signal that this is a kind of like a sort of wave is actually kind of like a created 100-meter away, 100-kilometer away, which kind of like a sort of 10-meter is actually 10-meter is bigger. Okay, yeah. So basically it kind of like a gives that particular data. Now data we actually, when we actually give, let's just say we are actually living in coastal area, let's just say I'm living in Bombay, and in Arabian Sea there is a kind of like a lot of bogies are actually available over there. So basically what does that bogie is actually sends the data regarding about the wave and how much the kind of like a somebody the height and things like that. Okay, yeah. So when this actually happen, when kind of like when there is a kind of like a wave is actually kind of like a scene that key there is a kind of like a wave is actually going much more like a higher distance, like a much more higher height, like a basically 10-meter 20-meter or maybe 40 or 50-meter. So basically it kind of like a showing that data, okay, this is kind of like a somebody wave is actually kind of like a somebody ahead of us, and which kind of like a arrive at the coastal area as fast as it can. So we kind of like we try to predict that, and let's just try to kind of like make sure that little less damage will gonna happen. So what should we supposed to do is that that wave is actually kind of like 100-kilometer away, which is kind of like it will gonna come at maybe within a like a basically within a 20-minute, okay, 20 or 40-minute. Okay, so basically is this thing we get that information. So what kind of like a somebody do we that we kind of like a go to the government, not the government, kind of like a put the signal that like a basically there is a lot of tsunamis actually coming within a 20-minute. So we have to be prepared for that. Government and rest of the kind of like a some authorizing bodies kind of like a work on that. So make sure that the coastal area of the Bombay should supposed to be maintained, and more and more people should supposed to be evacuated. So this process actually happened very fast. Okay, yeah, but let me tell you one thing: the evacuation is not the kind of like assembly only one thing that we could do. Okay, yeah, we make sure that the people who are actually kind of like assembly at the coastal area, that they should supposed to be go at the higher place. Okay, yeah, like go to the top of the building or top of the things or that. So when the NDRF team will gonna came, they will kind of like assembly high chances that they would supposed to be survive. Okay, yeah, make sure that ki kind of like give the kind of like alert or give the alertment on the phone or kind of like a siren or whatever it is, to make sure that people should supposed to be go at higher place or things like that, because there is a kind of like a slightly bigger tsunamis actually come and it will kind of like a erupted our city. So it is make sure that people should supposed to be at the higher place on ground. Okay, so we have to do all those things. Okay, shut down all the kind of like a plant, shut down all the kind of like a necessity electricity, like basically this is make sure they shut down the electricity, because of the like basically when the electricity will gonna happen, then probably electricity will kind of like a good conductor of the water, and when it kind of like a happen, then people might gonna kill by the shock. Okay, yeah, so kind of like a cut off that electricity. Okay, another thing is that ki, whatever the plant that they have, like a power plant or any kind of like a plant, shut down the thing it is. Okay, yeah, make sure that the if there is a nuclear plant, so basically this thing, make sure that whatever the radioactive material is kind of like a somebody situated at the kind of like a safe location, that it would not the react to someone else and kind of like not cause any kind of like a radiation, things like that. Okay, yeah, another thing is that regarding about the people. Okay, make sure that people should supposed to be like, we can't evacuate in very less amount of time, so we actually make sure that people should supposed to be kind of like somebody gather some sort of stuff which is very essential, and kind of like a went to the kind of like a higher place that other people should supposed to save, or NDRF team will be kind of like somebody save to the other people and things like that. Okay, yeah, another thing is that NDRF team is actually kind of like a launch, and it will kind of like a somebody that make sure that the very less and less damage would be happen. So basically this is in, they have arranged all the helicopters and things, and that all the supply foods and everything should supposed to be make sure that when the people is actually affected, how do we supposed to take care of that, how do we supposed to bring back all those people and things like that. Okay, yeah, so and another thing is that another thing, we actually kind of like have drainage system. Okay, yeah, we actually make sure that the drainage system is supposed to be active, so that when the kind of like somebody the tsunamis actually happen, the water will kind of like a flooded entire city, so drainage system should supposed to be active. So basically whatever the water that came out, it kind of like a drain as quickly as possible as it can. Okay, yeah, we shut down the highway, shut down the hospital, shut down the kind of like somebody any kind of like people who actually living there. Regarding about the hospital, make sure that all the patients who supposed to be evacuated somewhere else, because it is not really good thing to kind of like stay in that particular place. Okay, so this is all those things actually happen in very fast. Okay, yeah, to make sure that little less damage will gonna happen. And then when this actually happen, we kind of like have something that try to make sure that when the tsunami is actually hit to the coastal area, then we would kind of like save as much as people as they can. Okay, yeah, so this is kind of like when this happened, this is kind of like a preparation that we actually have. Okay, yeah, we actually have this lot of preparation. We actually have kind of like a drills, like a basically is this thing drill, like what is it, drill, kind of like somebody that actually training drill. Okay, yeah, regarding about the fire, regarding about earthquake, regarding about tsunami. Okay, yeah, Japan is a kind of like a somebody country where kind of like they are actually make sure that they are. Oh, घेतो ना. Oh. So, sorry, because of this thing. Okay, yeah, sorry, the disturbance and stuff like that. Okay, so what exactly is this thing? How is that particular? Sorry about the disturbance. Okay, I'm really sorry. Okay, yeah, let's just like I'm actually kind of like in the zone and things like that. Oh yeah, so when this kind of like somebody this prediction has actually happened, and when we try to save the people as much as we can, we kind of like somebody saving lot of lives, and not only the life, but we actually saving a lot of kind of like somebody the disaster control. We are actually creating a lot of kind of like disaster control as much as it possible way. Okay, yeah, so bogey is actually one way to kind of like predict that tsunami. But regarding about the earthquake, we also have a lot of sensor. We actually put the lot of sensor beneath the kind of like earth crust, which kind of like a sense the kind of like a somebody how much movement and how much it kind of like a things. But still the time required to kind of like make sure that this happened. Like basically what I'm trying to tell you is this thing, bogies are kind of like somebody giving the data before almost like a 10-20 minute. Okay, yeah, which is kind of like a um, little bit kind of like a something like a 10-20 minute is kind of like a something much more bigger time as compared to kind of like a earthquake. Because earthquake, like what I'm trying to tell you is this thing, that key, the earthquake is actually like a earthquake, like, but the predicting earthquake is a kind of like a very difficult. Okay, yeah, because it is like a, okay, it's kind of like a somewhat something like a little bit I'm not really sure about the how does we supposed to predict the earthquake, but it's somewhat something like a difficult than kind of like a some tsunami and things like that. Okay, yeah. There is a kind of like a only one way, I don't know, but I was kind of like a thinking about that. Okay, yeah. um like, it's this is not the thought that I have, this is kind of like a thought that like a years of ago. Yeah. What if I could kind of like a simply make a game? Okay, yeah, in that particular game, they actually kind of like a tell us a real story about the people who actually save another people from that disaster. Okay, yeah. And we kind of like assembly recreate that scenario in the game, and how what exactly things happen and stuff like that, because we have a lot of story when the disaster actually happened, and when how does other people is actually save other people, when the people actually save other people and things like that. Okay, yeah. When we say earthquake, when we say disaster, we might not understand the gravity of it unless we actually seen it. Okay, yeah. How much earthquake will kind of like a assembly disaster, how much it kind of like assembly really fucked up shit, we don't know that. Like basically this thing, how do I supposed to know that the disaster of the earthquake if I don't really seen that earthquake? Nothing really at all. How do I supposed to be kind of like understand the gravity of the tsunami if I don't really see the tsunami? Nothing really at all. The experience is somewhat something very much essential factor, so that people should supposed to be aware that how much big disaster was that. Okay, yeah. My game is a kind of like a something showing that kind of like reality, showing that kind of like a thing. Okay, yeah. My game is a kind of like, it's not the game that you should have to kill somebody. No, it's a game is actually about you have to be save people's life. Okay, yeah. So basically, like let's just imagine there is a kind of like a guy which is kind of like a somebody saving the people, which let's just say we're saving the one single child which is actually kind of like a somebody at the earthquake zone, and this particular person is kind of like a somebody saving that girl the way that it should supposed to be, and as a heroic way. It's really good. Okay, like basically this game is kind of like a celebrate that real people who actually kind of like a went through that particular thing, and kind of like a this game is actually creating that particular environment and stuff like that. And as a game, as a user who actually play that particular game, will kind of like a simply experience that particular first hand thing, and which would be really good. Okay, yeah. I don't know why, but it's just like that now, this game would be really great. Okay, with higher graphics and things and disaster and stuff like that. So I don't know, but in the future, if I have this particular thing, I might build that particular game. Okay, the name of the game would be Help. Okay, yeah. And I don't know, but like basically I thought that this thing like years ago, but I never really talk about that particular stuff. But because of this question actually arise, I just mentioned this thing, which would be really good. Alright, this is it. My father is actually yelling at. Okay, yeah. So thank you.